The silence in the glittering, chandelier-lit restaurant was louder than the scream that was caught in Celine's throat. One moment she was the beautiful pregnant wife of tech billionaire Lucan Blackwood, the envy of every woman in the room. The next she was a public spectacle, dripping in bittersweet chocolate ganache and humiliation. The gasps of the city's elite were a symphony of her disgrace. Lucan's face, a mask of cold fury over a declined credit card, was the last thing she saw clearly before her world shattered. But what he and everyone else mistook for weakness was the awakening of a storm. They thought they were watching a victim crumble. They had no idea they were witnessing the birth of a queen. The evening had begun as it always did as a performance. Celine Blackwood, née Varel, understood her role perfectly. She was to be serene, beautiful, and effortlessly elegant, a living, breathing testament to her husband's impeccable taste and success. At 7 months pregnant, the role was becoming more physically demanding, but she played it with the quiet grace that had first captivated Lucan. Tonight's stage was Aria, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a discreetly monogrammed oak door that opened into a world of hushed tones, crystal and velvet. The air smelled of money truffles and expensive perfume. Lucan was closing a major deal, a merger with a German tech conglomerate that would elevate him from a mere millionaire to a titan of industry. Herr Wagner and his wife, a stern-looking couple with eyes that appraised more than they admired, were their dinner guests. "Selina, darling." "You're glowing," Lucan had said, as he'd adjusted the diamond necklace against her skin before they left their sterile, white-on-white penthouse. It wasn't a compliment. It was an instruction. Glow. Perform. Be the asset I require. The dinner was a masterclass in tension. Lucan was charming, a predator, cloaked in a Tom Ford suit. His laughter a little too loud, his grip on Celine's thigh under the table a little too tight. He regaled the Wagners with tales of his meteoric rise, conveniently omitting the ruthless tactics and broken partnerships that paved his way. Celine smiled, sipped her water, and offered polite, intelligent contributions, when spoken to, drawing on her past life as an art curator, to discuss the German expressionist piece hanging near their table. "Your wife is not just beautiful, she is cultured." Frau Wagner noted a hint of surprise in her voice. The total package, Lucan agreed, patting Selina's hand as if she were a prize-winning show dog. She knows her place. The barb, subtle and meant only for her, slid under her skin. She knew her place, the place he had created for her. When they met, she had been a vibrant, independent woman with a passion for art and a small but fulfilling life. He had swept in like a hurricane, showering her with a world she'd only read about. He was intoxicating, brilliant, and persuasive. He had painted a future so beautiful that she had willingly handed him the brush, not realizing he would paint her into a corner of the canvas, decorative and silent. The deal was unofficially sealed over dessert. Handshakes were exchanged. Promises of synergistic futures were made. Lucan was incandescent with triumph. The waiter, a young man with nervous eyes, placed the leather bill folder discreetly on the table. This was another part of the performance. Lucan would always make a show of letting her handle the trivialities. "Darling, would you take care of that?" he said, waving a dismissive hand. He slid his wallet across the table. It was not his usual one. It was a slim crocodile leather card holder she didn't recognize. Use the Centurion. The black card. The ultimate symbol of his status. It was all part of the theater for the Wagners. Selene opened the holder. There was only one card inside, She took it, her fingers tracing the heavy anodized metal. She handed it to the waiter, who scurried away. They made small talk for a few minutes. Herr Wagner was discussing a summer trip to Monaco. Lucan was recommending a yacht charter company he had invested in. The performance was in its final triumphant act. Then the waiter returned. He approached the table with the shuffling, apologetic gait of someone about to deliver terrible news. He leaned down and whispered something to Lucan, his face pale. Celine couldn't hear the words, but she saw the shift in Lucan's posture. His back stiffened. The charming smile vanished, replaced by a tight, dangerous line. "What did you say?" Lucan's voice was low, but it cut through the restaurant's gentle hum. "I'm very sorry, sir," the waiter stammered, now audible to the whole table. "The card, it was declined." Silence. It was a stark, deafening silence that sucked all the air from the room. Herr and Frau Wagner froze their coffee cups, halfway to their lips. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs. Declined Lucan's black card. It was impossible. It was a bottomless well of credit, a testament to his financial omnipotence. Lucan slowly turned his head to look at Celine. His eyes, usually a warm hazel, were now chips of cold, hard stone. "What did you do?" he hissed. "What, nothing?" She whispered, her blood turning to ice. "I just gave him the card you gave me." "Don't lie to me, Celine." He seethed, his voice a venomous whisper. "Did you go on another one of your ridiculous shopping sprees? Did you buy another one of those hideous sculptures?" He was deliberately humiliating her, creating a narrative for their audience. The spendthrift wife, the irresponsible airhead. It was a fiction, and he knew it. He managed their finances with an iron fist. She was given an allowance, a generous one, but every penny was tracked. The card he had given her was not his primary one. It was a secondary card one he must have known had a limit. A limit she had apparently unknowingly reached. This was a setup, a test of loyalty and obedience that he had designed for her to fail. "Lucan, please," she begged softly, her eyes pleading. The Wagners were now staring at their plates with intense focus, wishing the floor would swallow them whole. "You've embarrassed me," he snarled, the facade of the charming billionaire crumbling to reveal the cruel, insecure man beneath. "You've made me look like a fool in front of my new partners." The waiter, desperate to defuse the situation, arrived with the dessert trolley. "Perhaps some cake, sir?" On the house. A celebratory slice of our Valrhona chocolate decadence. It was a beautiful cake, a glistening, multi-layered tower of dark chocolate mousse and ganache. A peace offering. Lucan looked at the cake. Then he looked at Celine. Her pale, horrified face, the swell of their child beneath her dress. A strange, terrifying smile twisted his lips. A celebratory slice, he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Yes, I think we should celebrate." And with a movement that was both shockingly fast and yet seemed to happen in slow motion, he picked up the largest slice of cake with his bare hand. The rich, dark frosting oozed between his fingers. "Here, darling," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Have some cake, since it's all you're good for." He lunged across the table and shoved the cake into her face. It wasn't a playful smear. It was an act of violent degradation. The force of it snapped her head back. The cold, sticky mass exploded against her cheek, her hair, her eyes. Globs of chocolate and cream slid down the front of her pristine white Chanel dress, a grotesque mockery of a corsage. For a moment, there was no sound, but her own ragged, choked breath. The world was a blur of chocolate and tears. Then the gasps, a collective horrified intake of breath from every corner of the restaurant. Frau Wagner let out a small, strangled cry. Celine sat there frozen, the sweet, cloying smell of chocolate filling her senses, the sticky mess hardening on her skin. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, a mixture of pity-disgust and morbid curiosity. Through the smear of frosting, she saw Lucan. He was standing breathing heavily, his hand still covered in cake. He wasn't looking at her with remorse. He was looking at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. He had done this to reassert his power, to punish her for a crime he had engineered, to remind her that he could and would destroy her at a whim. Something inside Celine, something that had been dormant for years, snapped. It was the part of her that had once been the independent curator, the woman who commanded respect, the woman who would never, ever allow herself to be treated this way. It was the fierce, primal instinct of a mother protecting her child from the poison of its own father. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her water glass. Her movements were calm and measured. She dipped her linen napkin into the water and began to wipe the chocolate from her face, her eyes never leaving Lucan's. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her silence was more damning than any tirade. She wiped her cheek clean, then her forehead. With each methodical swipe, she was wiping away the last 3 years of her life. She was wiping away the illusion of love, the gilded cage the woman she had pretended to be. When her face was relatively clean, she placed the soiled napkin neatly on the table. She looked at Lucan, at the stunned Wagners, at the gawking patrons. Then she rose to her feet, her posture as regal as a queen's. The chocolate-stained dress, a symbol of her humiliation, now looked like battle armor. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. She held Lucan's gaze for one long, final moment. In her eyes, he didn't see fear or shame. He saw a promise of a reckoning. Then she turned and walked away. Not with the hurried steps of a woman fleeing her shame, but with the steady, resolute stride of a woman walking toward a war. The silent restaurant parted for her like the Red Sea. The only sound was the soft click of her heels on the polished marble floor as she walked out of the restaurant, out of her marriage, and into a future she would carve out for herself. The great Lucan Blackwood was left standing in the ruins of his perfect evening, a smear of chocolate on his hand, and a look of dawning horror on his face, as he realized he hadn't just thrown a piece of cake. He had unleashed a fury he could never have imagined. The cold night air hit Celine like a physical blow, snapping her out of the surreal haze of the restaurant. Rain had begun to fall, a fine, misting drizzle that clung to her hair and mingled with the sticky residue of chocolate on her skin. The city lights of New York blurred into abstract streaks of neon and gold. For a few moments, she just stood on the pavement, the sounds of traffic, a dull roar in her ears, her hand resting protectively on the curve of her stomach. The doorman, a kind-faced man named Michael, who had always treated her with gentle deference, rushed forward with an oversized umbrella. "Mrs. Blackwood, are you all right? Your car is—" "Don't call the car," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. The name Mrs. Blackwood felt foreign, a costume she had just shed. "Just hail me a taxi, please, Michael." He saw the state of her dress, the look in her eyes, and wisely asked no more questions. A yellow cab pulled up, and she climbed inside the worn leather seat, a stark contrast to the plush interiors she was used to. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Where to? She couldn't go back to the penthouse. The thought of its cold, silent spaces, filled with objects Lucan had bought, but she had never loved, made her feel suffocated. It wasn't a home. It was a showroom. She had no family in the city. Her parents retired, and living a quiet life in Vermont would only panic. She scrolled through her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. There were dozens of names, wives of Lucan's associates, society acquaintances. Not friends. Not a single person she could show up to in the middle of the night covered in cake and metaphorical ruin. Except one. The Greenwich Hotel. She said the name coming to her in a flash. She paid for the cab in cash, a crumpled $100 bill she kept in a small pocket of her purse for emergencies. This, she thought with a grim sense of irony, certainly qualified. In the lobby, she ignored the concierge's discreetly raised eyebrow at her soiled dress and asked for the penthouse suite, paying with her personal credit card, the one linked to a trust her grandmother had left her, the one Lucan didn't know the full extent of. It was her only remaining link to her old life, a financial tether to Celine Varel. Once inside the sprawling, beautifully appointed suite, the dam broke. She slid down the door, her Chanel dress pooling around her, and finally let out the scream that had been trapped in her chest. It wasn't a scream of fear, but of rage. A primal, gut-wrenching roar of fury at her own blindness, at Lucan's cruelty, at the years she had wasted placating his fragile ego. She stayed on the floor for a long time, her hands wrapped around her belly, whispering to her unborn child. "I'm so sorry," she wept. "I am so sorry. I promise you this will never happen again. I will build you a world where you are safe, where you are loved, and where no one will ever treat you or your mother like that again." The tears were a baptism washing away the last vestiges of the naive woman who had fallen for a billionaire's charm. As the sun began to cast a grey dawn over the city, a new Celine emerged. Her eyes were puffy. Her designer dress was ruined, but her spine was forged in steel. Her phone began to buzz incessantly. It was Lucan. First a string of texts. "Where the hell are you? You made a complete fool of me. The Wagners are spooked. Get back to the apartment. Now!" "Celine, I swear to God if you don't answer me." Then the calls started one after another. She let it ring, watching the screen light up with the name Lucan. Each unanswered call felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of her own peace. An hour later, the tone of the texts shifted. "Darling, I'm sorry. I was under a lot of pressure. The deal, it made me crazy. Come home. We can talk about this. I love you. Don't throw this all away over a stupid misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. The word was so laughably inadequate it was insulting. He didn't see the problem. The problem wasn't the public humiliation, the assault with a piece of cake. The problem in his eyes was her reaction to it. Her defiance. She blocked his number. Then a new message popped up from a number she didn't recognize. "Celine, this is Eleanor Blackwood. Lucan is worried sick. Whatever spat you've had, you are being childish. A pregnant woman should not be running around the city alone at night. You have a duty to your husband and your child. Come home at once." Eleanor. Lucan's formidable mother, a woman carved from ice, whose approval Celine had pathetically sought for 3 years and never received. Eleanor had clawed her way out of poverty alongside her husband, and she guarded their family's status with the ferocity of a dragon. To Eleanor, Celine was an outsider, a pretty but ultimately unsuitable addition, lacking the requisite ruthlessness. Eleanor's text solidified Celine's resolve. This wasn't just a fight against Lucan. It was a fight against the entire Blackwood dynasty and the toxic values they embodied. She showered, scrubbing the last of the chocolate and the humiliation from her skin. She ordered room service, a feast of pancakes, fruit, and coffee, and ate with a hunger she hadn't felt in years. She was eating for two now in more ways than one. She was fueling herself for the fight of her life. She knew she couldn't do this alone. Lucan was a powerful man. He would use his wealth and influence to crush her, to paint her as an unstable gold digger, to fight for sole custody of their child out of pure spite. She needed a weapon, someone just as ruthless, just as brilliant, and just as unshakable as he was. Her mind went back to a charity gala a year ago. She had been seated next to a woman who had captivated her. While other women spoke of shopping and vacations, this woman spoke of hostile takeovers and Supreme Court precedents. She was sharp, incisive, and wore an air of authority that even Lucan had seemed to respect. Her name was Genevieve Dubois, one of the most feared divorce and corporate litigators in the country. They had exchanged pleasantries, and Genevieve had given her a card. "For you or for a friend," she'd said with a knowing look in her eye, a look that suggested she had seen 100 women like Celine, trapped in gilded cages. Selina had kept the card tucked away in her wallet, a talisman she never thought she'd need. She found the card. The elegant embossed lettering spelled out, "Dubois and Associates. We don't fight battles. We win wars." Her hand was steady as she dialed the number. "Genevieve Dubois's office? My name is Celine Blackwood," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I need to speak with Miss Dubois. It's a matter of extreme urgency." An hour later, a black town car picked her up from the hotel. She had used the hotel's concierge service to purchase a simple but elegant navy blue dress, a pair of low heels and a coat. Dressed in her new anonymous armor, she walked out of the Greenwich, leaving the ruined Chanel dress and the identity of Celine Blackwood in a heap on the floor. The offices of Dubois and Associates were on the 50th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park. The decor was minimalist and powerful dark wood steel and glass. No soft edges. Genevieve Dubois was standing by the window when Celine was shown in. She was a tall, imposing woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe chignon. She was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than Celine's new dress. "Mrs. Blackwood," Genevieve said, her voice smooth as silk. She gestured to a leather chair. "Please sit. I must admit your call intrigued me." Celine sat. She didn't cry or recount the story with histrionics. In a calm, factual tone, she described the dinner. She described the cake. She described the years of subtle control, the emotional manipulation, the isolation. She spoke of her pregnancy and her fear for her child's future in such a toxic environment. Genevieve listened without interruption. Her fingers steepled her eyes, never leaving Celine's face. When Celine was finished, there was a long silence. "He didn't just throw cake at you, Mrs. Blackwood," Genevieve said, finally, her voice low and intense. "He announced to the world, and more importantly to you, that you are his property, an object he can deface at will. The public nature of the assault was deliberate. It was designed to shatter your self-worth and ensure you felt too ashamed to fight back." "He underestimated me," Celine said, her voice hard. A slow smile spread across Genevieve's face. "Good. That's his first mistake. It won't be his last." She stood up and walked over to a large whiteboard, picking up a black marker. Your husband is worth, by public estimates, approximately $900 million, soon to be over $1 billion with the Wagner merger. He has a team of lawyers who are, for lack of a better word, sharks. They will try to paint you as mentally unstable, citing postpartum hormonal changes. They will claim you are an unfit mother. They will offer you a settlement that seems huge to a normal person, but is pocket change to him. And they will bury it under an ironclad NDA that will silence you forever. She turned to face Celine. You can take that deal. You can walk away with, say, $20 million and a gag order. You can live a very comfortable life in obscurity. Or, she paused, her eyes gleaming, we can do something else. We don't just ask for a divorce. We don't just fight for custody. We go to war. We take the foundation of his power, his company, and we crack it. Celine stared at her. How is that even possible? Lucan Blackwood is new money, Genevieve stated, as if reciting a case file. Men like that, men who rise that fast, always cut corners. They leave footprints. Shady investors fudged numbers, conveniently lost documents. You, Celine, have been living inside his fortress for 3 years. You've listened to his late-night calls. You've seen the names on his private calendar. You've been the perfect decorative wife, which means he got careless. He spoke freely around you, believing you were either not listening or not intelligent enough to understand. Am I wrong? Celine's mind began to race. The hushed, angry phone calls Lucan would take in his study. The trips to the Cayman Islands, he claimed, were for banking diversification. The odd visitor who came to the penthouse late at night, a man named Silas Thorne, who looked more like a thug than a businessman. The way Lucan had boasted about outsmarting the SEC on an early venture. At the time, it was just noise, the background music of her life with him. Now, it was ammunition. No, Celine said, a new, dangerous excitement building inside her. You're not wrong. This is what we do, Genevieve said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We don't start by filing for divorce. That puts him on the defensive. We start by gathering our arsenal silently. You will become my primary intelligence asset. You will tell me everything you can remember. Every name, every date, every offhand comment. We will hire the best forensic accountants and private investigators in the world. While he is busy trying to bully you back home, we will be building a case so damning that when we finally make our move, he won't have a choice. A choice for what? Celine asked. Not for half, Celine. Genevieve said, her eyes burning with intensity. That's what his ex-wife would ask for. You are going to be so much more than that. We are going to position you to take a controlling interest in the one thing he truly loves, Blackwood Industries. We will prove that his initial seed funding was fraudulent, and that you, through your support and the use of your own premarital assets, which he leveraged without your knowledge, have a foundational claim to the entire enterprise. It was an audacious, breathtakingly bold strategy. It was terrifying, and it was the most empowering thing Selina had ever heard. It wasn't about money or revenge. It was about justice. It was about taking the power he had abused and wielding it to build a better, safer future for her child. He will try to destroy me, Celine whispered. Let him try, Genevieve replied with a shark's smile. He's bringing a cake to a gunfight. Now tell me everything you know about a man named Silas Thorne. Celine took a deep breath. The war had begun. The next 2 months were a masterclass in clandestine warfare. Celine, under Genevieve's meticulous guidance, became a spy in her own past life. She checked into a long-stay residence at the Mandarin Oriental under the name Selene Varel, a symbolic reclaiming of her identity. The suite became their war room, its pristine walls soon covered in whiteboards, filled with names, dates, and intricate webs connecting shell corporations and offshore accounts. Her first task was a deep dive into her own memory. Genevieve brought in a specialist, a former intelligence analyst named David Chen, who was an expert in memory retrieval. For days, David guided her through her years with Lucan, not with hypnosis, but with structured cognitive interviewing techniques. Think about his study, Selene. David would say, his voice calm and even. Don't think about the arguments. Think about the objects. What was on his desk? What did the papers look like? What did you smell? Slowly fragmented details sharpened into focus. The scent of Lucan's specific cologne mixed with the old paper smell of a particular leather-bound ledger he kept in a locked desk drawer. The name on the ledger was Project Nightingale. He'd once drunkenly referred to it as the nest egg no one can touch. She recalled the key was not on his main keyring, but on the back of a small, ugly painting of a ship that hung in their dressing room. A gift from his mother he dared not remove. Silas Thorne, she remembered. He visited maybe 5 or 6 times, always late. Lucan would take him into the study, and they would talk for hours. Once I brought them drinks and I heard Silas say, "The assets are clean. They've passed through 3 territories. The original source is untraceable." Every morsel was a victory. Genevieve's team of forensic accountants, a formidable group known as the Vultures, took the information and vanished into the labyrinth of global finance. Meanwhile, the Blackwood machine churned into motion, just as Genevieve had predicted. Lucan, realizing Selena was not coming back, unleashed his lawyers. The first shot was a formal letter delivered by a courier. It was an offer, a one-time payment of $25 million in exchange for a swift, quiet divorce, and her signature on an NDA so restrictive she wouldn't be able to write a memoir about her life as a hamster, let alone her marriage. The letter also included a veiled threat about her emotional state and Lucan's deep concern for the well-being of his unborn child in her sole care. "Standard move," Genevieve scoffed, tossing the letter onto a table. "He thinks he's dealing with a scorned wife. He has no idea he's negotiating with a future corporate raider. We ignore it." Next came the family. Eleanor Blackwood managed to get Celine's new unlisted number and called. Her voice was like splinters of ice. "Celine, I don't know what kind of pathetic game you're playing, but it ends now." Eleanor began dispensing with any pretense of warmth. "You are carrying a Blackwood heir. That child will not be born into scandal. You will accept Lucan's generous offer and disappear gracefully, or I will personally spend every last dollar of my fortune to prove to a court that you are an unstable, unfit, gold-digging whore. Do you understand me?" The old Celine would have crumbled. The new Celine felt a cold calm settle over her. "Eleanor," she replied, her voice even, "I suggest you retain your own legal counsel. You might need it. And if you ever speak to me in that tone again, I will add slander to the growing list of charges. Goodbye." She hung up, her heart pounding, but her spirit soaring. The most painful move came from Lucan's brother Marcus. Marcus had always been the good Blackwood, gentle and artistic, often caught in his older brother's domineering shadow. He'd always been kind to Celine, treating her like a sister. He called her, his voice full of concern. I'm so sorry," he said, sounding genuinely distraught. "Lucan is out of his mind. What he did is unforgivable. But please don't let this get ugly. Think of the baby. Maybe you and I can talk, mediate. I can talk some sense into him. I'm on your side in this." Against her better judgment, Celine felt a flicker of hope. She agreed to meet him for coffee in a neutral public place. She chose a bustling cafe in the West Village. Marcus was waiting, looking anxious. He held her hands, his eyes full of sympathy. "He's a monster when he feels threatened," Marcus said. "But he's my brother. I can't just abandon him. Tell me what you want, what's your plan? How can I help?" She wanted to trust him. She desperately wanted an ally within the family, but Genevieve's voice echoed in her head. "Everyone is a combatant until proven otherwise. A Blackwood's first loyalty is always to the family name and the money that protects it." So she played her part. She acted distraught and confused. "I don't know what to do, Marcus," she said, letting a tear slip down her cheek. "My lawyer, she's so aggressive. She's talking about trying to ruin Lucan to go after the company. I don't want that. I just want to be safe to have enough to raise my child quietly." She then fed him a piece of calculated misinformation. She thinks there's a weakness in the initial public offering of his first company, InnovateX. She's focusing all her investigators on that. Marcus's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something she couldn't quite read, before he masked it with sympathy. "That's crazy," he said, shaking his head. "There's nothing there. I'll tell Lucan to have his lawyers get ahead of it. Don't worry, I'll protect you." When she reported the conversation to Genevieve, the lawyer's smile was predatory. "And the trap is set," she said. "He'll run right to Lucan and tell him to fortify his defenses around InnovateX, which is exactly what we want, because the real rot isn't in InnovateX, it's in Project Nightingale. While they're busy guarding the front door, we'll be breaking in through the basement." As Lucan's legal team focused on a wild goose chase, Genevieve's investigators hit pay dirt. The key Celine remembered hidden behind the ugly ship painting was their first major breakthrough. A discreet operative, a former MI6 agent who specialized in asset retrieval, was hired. Posing as an art appraiser sent by Eleanor to update their insurance policies, a ruse Eleanor unwittingly confirmed when the appraiser called her office, he gained access to the penthouse. 20 minutes later, he walked out with high-resolution photographs of every page in the Project Nightingale ledger. The ledger was the smoking gun. It detailed the initial multi-million-dollar seed money for what would become Blackwood Industries. The funds weren't from venture capitalists, as Lucan had always claimed. They were from Silas Thorne. And further digging by the vultures revealed that Silas Thorne was a professional money launderer, a ghost in the system, who cleaned cash for arms dealers and drug cartels. Lucan Blackwood hadn't built his empire on a brilliant idea. He'd built it on dirty money. But there was another more personal bombshell hidden in the records. Just before their marriage, Lucan had convinced Celine to invest a significant portion of her grandmother's trust into what he called a private equity fund managed by a friend. He had promised her it would triple in value, providing a nest egg for their future. The ledger revealed the truth. The fund was a shell company that funneled her clean, legitimate money directly into the same account as Silas Thorne's dirty cash. Her money had been used as a clean layer in the laundering scheme, giving it a veneer of legitimacy that helped it pass bank scrutiny. He hadn't just married her. He had used her. He had made her an unwitting accomplice in a criminal enterprise. Celine felt sick. The betrayal was so profound, so calculated it stole her breath. This went beyond infidelity or cruelty. This was a violation of the deepest trust. "This changes everything," Genevieve said, her voice grim, as they stared at the flowcharts connecting Celine's trust to Thorne's illicit network. This is no longer a divorce. It's a reclamation. Under established legal precedent, specifically the unclean hands doctrine, a case can be made that the entire foundation of Blackwood Industries is fraudulent. And your investment, your clean money that he criminally co-opted, gives you a legitimate foundational claim. You weren't just an investor. You were the legitimate seed that allowed his poisoned tree to grow. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a phone call from one of Genevieve's investigators in the Cayman Islands. He had managed to track down a disgruntled former employee of the bank Lucan used. For the right price, the banker was willing to talk. He confirmed that Lucan Blackwood and Silas Thorne were co-signatories on the original Nightingale account, and that he had been paid handsomely to look the other way when large, untraceable wire transfers arrived. They had him. They had the ledger, the banking trail, and a human witness. While this was happening, Lucan, feeling increasingly cornered, escalated his public campaign against her. Tabloid articles began appearing quoting anonymous sources close to the family, who painted Celine as a mentally unstable, greedy woman whose erratic behavior had forced a heartbroken Lucan to take action. They even twisted the cake incident, claiming she had become hysterical over a declined card, and had thrown the cake at him, and that in the ensuing chaos she had stumbled and gotten it on herself. It was a lie so audacious it was almost brilliant. But Celine, armed with the truth of Project Nightingale, felt nothing. The lies were the desperate flailings of a drowning man. "It's time," Genevieve announced one evening, closing a thick binder filled with evidence. "He thinks he's winning the public relations war. He has no idea he's about to be checkmated. We're not going to his lawyers. We're not going to the press. You are going to go directly to him." "What?" Celine was stunned. "You are going to request a meeting. Just the two of you. Not in an office. In the penthouse. Your home," Genevieve instructed. "He will be arrogant. He will think you are there to surrender. And that is when you will show him the board. Not to threaten him, but to give him his one and only choice. He can either face federal prison for money laundering and fraud, or he can agree to our terms. And our terms are not half of his fortune." Genevieve slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't a divorce settlement. It was a stock transfer agreement. "Our terms," she said with a chilling smile, "are control." The request for a meeting was sent via a simple direct email from Celine to Lucan, bypassing their lawyers. "Lucan, I think it's time we spoke face to face. Alone. At the penthouse. Tomorrow evening at 7. His reply was almost instantaneous. "I'll be there." Celine could feel his smugness through the screen. He would assume her resources were drained, her spirit broken by his media campaign. He would see her request to meet on his home turf as an act of surrender. He was walking into his own throne room, expecting to receive a plea for mercy, utterly oblivious to the fact that he was walking into an execution. The next evening, Celine arrived at the penthouse 10 minutes early. She had chosen her armor with care, a simple, impeccably tailored black dress that spoke of quiet power, not flamboyant wealth. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup minimal. She looked, she thought, like a woman who meant business. Her baby bump was more prominent now, a constant physical reminder of what and who she was fighting for. She walked through the vast, silent rooms. The cold, white marble, the minimalist furniture, the museum-quality art he had purchased as investments. It all felt alien. It had never been a home. It was a monument to his ego. She stopped in front of the ugly painting of the ship in the dressing room, the one that had hidden the key to his downfall. With a small, grim smile, she took it off the wall and leaned it against the fireplace, a silent trophy for her eyes only. The doorbell chimed at precisely 8 p.m. She opened it herself. Lucan stood there, a vision of arrogant success. He was perfectly dressed, his expression a carefully calibrated mix of condescension and feigned concern. "Celine," he said, his voice smooth. "I'm glad you came to your senses." He strode past her into the living room, pouring himself a whiskey from the crystal decanter on the bar. "Look, I'm prepared to be generous. My original offer still stands. 25 million. It's more than enough for you and the baby to live comfortably. Just sign the papers and we can both move on." Celine didn't say a word. She walked over to the large marble coffee table and placed a thin leather-bound folder on its surface. "What's that?" he asked, taking a sip of his drink. "A counter-offer from that shark you hired. Don't bother. My lawyers will tear it to shreds. This isn't from my lawyer." "Lucan," she said, her voice calm and level, devoid of the emotion he expected. "This is from me." He watched a flicker of annoyance in his eyes as she opened the folder. Inside were not legal documents, but a series of high-gloss photographs. She laid them out on the table, one by one. The first was a crystal-clear image of the Project Nightingale ledger, open to a page showing Silas Thorne's name next to a wire transfer for $10 million. Lucan froze. The whiskey glass paused halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face. The second photograph was a flow chart meticulously drawn, showing the path of money from Thorne's known shell corporations directly into the seed fund for Blackwood Industries. The third photograph was another flow chart. This one showed the direct transfer of funds from Celine's own trust account into the very same fund. Her clean money mingling with the dirty. "Where did you get these?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You taught me to appreciate art, Lucan," she said coolly. "So I hired an appraiser to look at our collection. He was particularly interested in a certain painting of a ship." His eyes darted towards the fireplace, where the painting leaned. The look on his face was a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated panic. He finally understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an ambush. The Cayman National Bank was also very helpful. Celine continued, her voice relentless. "It seems a certain junior vice president was feeling underpaid and overstressed. He kept impeccable private records, and he's prepared to testify." She let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. She watched the billionaire titan of industry, the man who had humiliated her in front of the world, visibly crumble. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a trapped animal. He was no longer seeing his scorned wife. He was seeing the architect of his ruin. "What do you want?" he finally managed to say. His voice barely a rasp. "Money. You want half, fine, take it. Take half the company. Just destroy those." Celine gave a small, humorless laugh. "Half. Oh, Lucan, you still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. It's about consequences. It's about building a future for my child, a future that isn't founded on criminality and deceit. I don't want to be your silent, wealthy ex-wife. I want to erase the poison you started this company with." She slid a final document out of the folder. It was not a photograph. It was a legally binding contract, drafted by Genevieve Dubois and a team of the most brilliant corporate lawyers in the country. "You have two choices," she said, her voice like ice. "Choice A. I walk out of this building, and this folder gets delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the SEC. You'll be arrested by morning. You'll spend years in court and you will likely end up in federal prison. Silas Thorne's other associates probably won't be happy about the attention. The name Blackwood will be synonymous with fraud. Your company will collapse, your family will be disgraced, and your child will visit you in a prison jumpsuit." She paused, letting the horror of the image sink in. Or she said, pushing the contract across the table towards him, "Choice B." He stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. "What is it?" "It's a stock transfer and restructuring agreement," she explained. "You will voluntarily cede a 51% controlling interest of Blackwood Industries to a new holding company, a holding company of which I am the sole director." He stared at her dumbfounded. You want to run the company?" The idea was so alien to his perception of her that he could barely process it. "I don't want to run it day to day. I'll install a new ethical CEO, a board of directors that isn't composed of your sycophants, but I will have control. Final say. You will retain a 49% stake, making you incredibly wealthy on paper. You will be given the title of founder and chief product advisor, but you will have no executive power. You will step down as CEO, citing a desire to focus on new innovations and your growing family. We will present a united, amicable front to the world. You will be free. The company will be saved. But it will be mine. Its future will be clean. That is my price." It was a checkmate, so absolute, so devastating that he couldn't speak. She wasn't just taking his money. She was taking his power, his identity, his legacy. She was leaving him a figurehead, a ghost in his own machine. The humiliation was 1,000 times greater than throwing a piece of cake. It was a precise surgical dismantling of his entire existence. He looked around the room at the life he had built, the empire founded on a rotten core. He looked at Celine. Really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see the docile, decorative woman he had married. He saw a stranger, a brilliant, ruthless strategist who had outplayed him at his own game. He saw the woman she had been all along, the woman he had tried and failed to extinguish. "You've been planning this for months," he breathed. "Ever since you showed me who you truly were." She replied, "You threw cake at me to show me I was nothing. I am taking your company to show you that you made me everything." He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He was defeated, utterly and completely. He knew he had no choice. The alternative was unthinkable. "My lawyers will need to see this." He mumbled a final feeble attempt to grasp at control. "Of course," Celine said. She pulled out her phone. "Genevieve is waiting downstairs. Shall I send her up?" The finality of it crushed him. It was already done. He picked up a pen from the desk, his hand shaking. He looked at the signature line, and with the stroke of a pen, Lucan Blackwood signed away his kingdom. Celine watched him, feeling not triumph, but a quiet, solemn sense of justice. She gathered her photographs and the signed contract. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. "You will be a father to our child Lucan," she said, looking back at his broken form. "You will be present, you will be kind, and you will be respectful. You will teach him about technology and innovation, and I will teach him about integrity. He will have the best of both of us, and none of the worst. That is my other condition." And with that, she walked out of the penthouse, leaving the door open behind her. She didn't look back. She walked out into the glittering New York night, no longer Mrs. Blackwood, the billionaire's wife, but Celine Varel, the majority shareholder of Blackwood Industries. She was free, and she was just getting started. Celine's story didn't end with her signature on a piece of paper. It began. She didn't just take over a company. She transformed it. Under her leadership and with a hand-picked CEO, Blackwood Industries was restructured from the ground up, becoming a model for ethical innovation and corporate responsibility. The Nightingale Project was rechristened the Varel Foundation, a charitable trust dedicated to supporting female entrepreneurs and victims of domestic abuse, funded by Lucan's 49% share of the profits. Her story, when it was finally told on her terms, wasn't one of a wife's revenge, but of a woman's incredible resilience. She proved that the most powerful response to humiliation isn't anger, but intelligence, strategy, and the unwavering courage to rebuild a better world from the ashes of a broken one. She didn't just leave her toxic marriage. She turned the very source of her oppression into her greatest instrument of power and positive change. A penthouse overlooking Central Park, a walk-in closet overflowing with Hermes, and a baby on the way. Anya had it all. Or so she thought. In the blink of an eye, her billionaire husband, a man who once promised her the world, stood before her, his words colder than the winter wind whipping across their panoramic window. "I want a divorce." But before the ink could dry on the papers, a knock on the door changed everything. His mistress wasn't there to gloat. She was there to expose a secret so dark it would make his demand for a divorce the least of Anya's worries. The scent of blooming peonies and old money filled the air of the penthouse apartment on the 82nd floor of 432 Park Avenue. It was a sterile, curated scent, one that Anya had come to associate with her life, beautiful, expensive, and utterly devoid of the earthy reality she secretly craved. From this height, New York City was a glittering, silent diorama. The yellow cabs were ants, the sprawling green of Central Park, a manicured carpet, and the people, the millions of bustling, striving souls, were entirely insignificant. Just like her. Anya traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the stark minimalist decor Julian insisted upon. Everything was shades of grey chrome and glass. It was the home of a man who admired his reflections, both literal and financial. He called it uncluttered. Anya called it empty. Her hand drifted down to the gentle swell of her stomach, a 6-month bump that was her only true possession in this sky-high palace. This baby, her baby, was the one vibrant, chaotic, and real thing in her life. It was a secret garden she nurtured within herself, a world away from Julian's meticulous control. Julian Croft. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a visionary in the volatile world of tech mergers and acquisitions. His face, all sharp angles and disarming smiles, graced the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He had a Midas touch, turning fledgling startups into billion-dollar unicorns with a flick of his pen. He had swept Anya off her feet 5 years ago. She was a junior art curator, then full of opinions and passion, and he had seemed utterly captivated by her spirit. He'd courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that leave a woman breathless, a private viewing at the Met, a weekend trip to Paris, on a whim a rare first-edition book of poetry she'd once mentioned in passing. He had built a gilded cage for her, and she, dazzled by the shine, had walked right in. She'd given up her small gallery job, her cramped but cozy apartment in the village, and her circle of wonderfully messy artistic friends. Julian had said he wanted to give her the world. She hadn't realized he meant he wanted to become her entire world. The sound of the private elevator chiming its arrival pulled her from her reverie. Julian was home. Early. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach, a feeling that had become increasingly familiar over the past few months. He strode into the living area, looking every inch the master of the universe. His bespoke Tom Ford suit clung perfectly to his athletic frame, his dark hair was impeccably styled, and his face held the neutral, unreadable expression he reserved for high-stakes negotiations. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the panoramic view, as if calculating its net worth. Julian Anya began, her voice softer than she intended. "You're home. I was just about to have the chef start on dinner." He turned then, and the coldness in his eyes extinguished the small flicker of hope in her chest. There was no warmth, no flicker of recognition for his pregnant wife. It was the look he gave a line item on a balance sheet that was underperforming. "Don't bother," he said, his voice flat and clipped. He walked over to the marble bar and poured himself a whiskey, the clink of the decanter against the glass, unnaturally loud in the silent room. "We need to talk, Anya." Anya's hand instinctively went back to her belly, a protective gesture. "Is everything all right? Did the deal with the Japanese consortium fall through?" She tried to grasp for a familiar topic, a corner of his life she was still permitted to understand. He took a long swallow of his drink, his throat bobbing. "The deal is fine. Everything in my life is perfectly aligned. Except this." He gestured vaguely between them, an all-encompassing wave that dismissed their 5 years of marriage. Their shared bed, the child growing inside her. This, she whispered, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. This marriage, he stated, turning to face her fully. His face was a mask of detached finality. "It's run its course. It no longer serves its purpose. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, sharp and deadly, like shards of glass from the panoramic window he so admired. Anya felt the blood drain from her face. She must have misheard. This was Julian's idea of a joke, a cruel, power-playing jest to see her squirm. "A divorce," she stammered, a hysterical little laugh escaping her lips. "Julian, what are you talking about?" "I'm pregnant. We're having a baby." "I'm aware of the child's existence," he said, his voice laced with an icy patience that was more terrifying than any shout. "My lawyers have already been instructed to be generous. A trust will be established for the child. You will be provided with a settlement that will allow you to live very comfortably. A nice apartment, a staff, whatever you need. You will want for nothing materially." Materially. The word was an insult, a deliberate reduction of her life, her love, her very being to a transaction. The man who had once quoted poetry to her was now liquidating her like a bad asset. "I don't want a settlement, Julian. I want my husband. I want the father of my child." Her voice cracked, the carefully constructed composure of the perfect wife, shattering into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. "What has happened to you? What has happened to us? Nothing has happened," he insisted, his calm unwavering. He was a stone wall, impervious to her pain. "This was always a contract, Anya. An arrangement. You provided beauty, social grace, a certain aesthetic. I provided a lifestyle beyond your wildest dreams. The contract is now being terminated." "A contract?" She stared at him aghast. The last 5 years replayed in her mind, now tainted and twisted by his cruel words. Every shared laugh, every tender touch, Every whispered promise now felt like a lie, a performance. She felt a wave of nausea so profound it had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She had been a fool, a beautiful, well-kept, blind fool. There's someone else, isn't there? The question was a classic, a cliché she never thought she'd utter. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. Not guilt, but a flicker of annoyance, as if she were a fly buzzing around his head. That's irrelevant to the situation. Irrelevant? She cried, her voice rising. You're throwing me out pregnant with your child, and you tell me your mistress is irrelevant. Who is she, Julian? He walked over to the sleek obsidian desk in the corner and pulled a thick document from a leather briefcase. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table between them. The sound was a final, definitive thud. These are the divorce papers, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. My lawyers advise you to sign them without contest. A prolonged, messy battle will not be beneficial for you, or for the public's perception of you. I have a reputation to maintain. He was threatening her. He was threatening to paint her as a gold digger, a shrew, to drag her name through the mud, while he stood pristine on his mountain of money. The cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was trying to erase her, to control the very narrative of her existence, even as he expelled her from his. She looked from the papers to his cold, handsome face. The man she loved, or the man she thought she loved, was gone. In his place stood a monster, a creature of pure, unadulterated avarice and ego. A profound, chilling clarity washed over her. The shock receded, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar anger. No, she said, her voice trembling, but firm. Julian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. No. I will not sign these. I will not be discarded like one of your failed investments. This child, she said, her hand protectively cradling her belly, deserves a father. And I deserve an explanation. A real one. Julian's jaw tightened. He was not used to being told no. The air crackled with his silent fury. He took a step towards her, his physical presence suddenly feeling overwhelming, threatening. You are making a grave mistake, Anya, he hissed. You have no idea what you're messing with. You have no idea the forces at play here. Sign the papers. Take the money. Disappear quietly. It's the best option for everyone. His words held a hidden weight, a darker undercurrent that went beyond a simple sordid affair. The forces at play here. It wasn't the plea of a man in love with someone else. It was a warning, a threat. Before Anya could respond, before she could decipher the strange, panicked glint in his eyes, the chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse once more. Both their heads snapped towards the sound. Julian's face for the first time that evening lost its composure. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his features so quick that Anya almost missed it. He looked trapped. Who is that? Anya asked, her own confusion mounting. They weren't expecting anyone. Julian guarded their privacy with a zeal that bordered on paranoid. Don't. Julian breathed, his eyes wide, as he stared at the elevator doors. It wasn't a command to Anya, but a desperate plea to the universe. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft, expensive sigh. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with raven black hair cut into a sharp, severe bob, and eyes the color of emeralds. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, bloody slash of color in the monochrome world of Julian's penthouse. Anya's heart stopped. It had to be her. The mistress. She had come to gloat, to witness the final destruction of the wife to claim her prize. Anya braced herself for the humiliation, the final crushing blow. But the woman's eyes weren't on Anya. They were locked on Julian, and they held no trace of triumph. Her beautiful face was pale. Her hands were trembling, and her emerald eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored the panic on Julian's face. She took a shaky step into the room. Julian, the woman, said, her voice a ragged whisper that cut through the silence. "It's over. They know. They know everything." Julian stared at her, his mask of control utterly shattered. He looked like a man staring at his own ghost. Anya looked back and forth between her husband and this beautiful, terrified stranger. A cold dread far deeper and more terrifying than the pain of betrayal began to creep up her spine. This wasn't about a simple affair. Julian's strange warning, his panic, this woman's fear, it was all connected to something far bigger. The divorce papers lay on the table, forgotten. The gilded cage had just burst open, but Anya had a sickening feeling that she hadn't been set free. She had just been tossed into the fire. The woman in the crimson dress took another hesitant step into the cavernous living room. Her designer heels, which should have clicked with authority on the polished marble floor, were instead unnervingly silent, as if she were trying to retract her own presence. Anya's mind, still reeling from the whiplash of the divorce demand, struggled to process this new bizarre tableau. The mistress, for who else could she be, wasn't acting like a victor. She was acting like a fugitive. "Isabel, what the hell are you doing here?" Julian finally managed to say, his voice a strangled rasp. He shot a venomous glare at her, a look that was less about a spurned lover and more about a co-conspirator who had broken rank. He moved almost unconsciously to position himself between Isabel and Anya, a futile attempt to control the flow of information. "I tried to call you Isabel," said her voice, trembling. She ignored Anya completely, her gaze fixed on Julian's increasingly frantic expression. "Your phone was off. I left a dozen messages with your secretary. I had to come. We don't have any time." "Time for what?" Anya interjected, her voice finding a new steely edge. The initial shock was beginning to curdle into suspicion. "Time to coordinate your stories before you throw me out." Isabel's head snapped towards Anya, and for the first time she seemed to truly see her. There was no malice in her emerald eyes, no smug superiority. Instead, Anya saw a flicker of something that looked unnervingly like pity. It was an expression that infuriated Anya more than any taunt could have. "This has nothing to do with your marriage," Isabel said, with a dismissive wave of her hand that was so absolute it was chilling. "That's just collateral damage. A loose end he was trying to tie up." "A loose end." Anya repeated the words, tasting like ash. She looked at Julian, whose face was now a ghastly shade of pale. "Is that what I am to you, Julian? A loose end?" "Shut up!" Isabel Julian roared, finally losing the last vestige of his icy control. He lunged towards her, grabbing her arm. "You shouldn't be here. We had a plan. The plan is shot to hell." "Julian." Isabel wrenched her arm free, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of anger. The plan went up in smoke the moment my brother's name appeared on the SEC's inquiry list this morning. The acronym hung in the air, SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The federal agency that policed Wall Street, the boogeyman of every high-flying financier. It was a name Anya knew from the headlines from the periphery of Julian's world, but it had never felt real, never had any bearing on her curated life. Until now. What SEC inquiry Anya demanded, stepping forward. She was no longer just a passive victim in a domestic drama. She was an unwilling participant in something far more sinister. Julian. What is she talking about? She's talking nonsense. Julian spat, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist 82 floors in the sky. She's hysterical. Her brother made some bad investments, and now she's panicking and trying to drag me into it. He was trying to rebuild his wall of composure, but the cracks were showing. His hands were trembling, and a thin sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. Bad investments. Isabel let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held no humor. Is that what you call it? You used him. Julian. You used my family's brokerage firm as a shield. You ran the entire scheme through their accounts. Made them look like the masterminds while you stayed clean. Scheme. The word was a poison dart. Anya's gaze swung back to Julian. His entire empire, his Midas touch, was it all just a trick? A lie, just like their marriage. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice low and threatening as he took a step towards Isabel. And I suggest you leave now before you say something you'll regret. No. Isabel stood her ground, her chin held high. The fear was still there, but it was now bolstered by a desperate, cornered resolve. I'm not taking the fall for you. My brother is not going to prison for you. I loved you, Julian, or I thought I did. But I see what you are now. You don't love anyone. You consume them. You use them up, and then you discard the husk. Her eyes flickered to Anya. She knows. Don't you? Anya thought back. The last 6 months, Julian's increasing secrecy, his late nights at the office, which she had assumed were due to his affair, the strange hushed phone calls he would take in his study, ending them abruptly if she walked in, the way he had systematically isolated her, severing her ties to her old friends, even discouraging visits from her own family, claiming he wanted to protect her peace and privacy during her pregnancy. It hadn't been about protecting her. It had been about isolating a witness. What scheme, Julian? Anya's voice was dangerously quiet. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, terrifying calm. What did you do? Anya, listen to me, Julian said, turning to her, his voice attempting a gentleness that now sounded grotesque and manipulative. She's a scorned woman. She's trying to ruin me because I ended our affair. It's the oldest story in the book. You're my wife. You're the mother of my child. It's you I'm trying to protect. He was trying to play her to use their shared history and their unborn child as a shield. But the spell was broken. She could see the puppeteer's strings. Protect. She repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. By demanding a divorce an hour ago, by calling me a loose end, you needed to tie up. You weren't trying to protect me. You were trying to cut me loose before the ship sank, weren't you? You wanted to make sure I couldn't claim a single cent of your precious, dirty money when it all came crashing down. The truth of it hit her with the force of a physical blow. The divorce wasn't about his love for Isabel. It was a calculated financial maneuver. A preemptive strike in a war he knew was coming. He was willing to make his own pregnant wife a refugee from his life to save himself. It's called a SPAC. Isabel said, suddenly, her voice sharp and clear. She was no longer speaking just to Julian, but to Anya, to the room, to the universe. She was confessing. A special purpose acquisition company. It's the cleanest grift on Wall Street right now. Anya had heard Julian talk about SPACs. He'd called them blank check companies, a faster, more efficient way to take a private company, public bypassing the rigorous scrutiny of a traditional IPO. He had launched 3 of them in the last 2 years, raising billions from investors eager to get in on the ground floor of his next big thing. The media had lauded him as an innovator. Your husband, Isabel, continued, her voice gaining a morbid momentum, is a master at selling dreams. He would launch a SPAC, promising to merge it with a revolutionary tech company. The hype alone would send the stock soaring. Investors from massive hedge funds to ordinary people would pour their life savings into it all, based on his reputation. She paused, taking a shaky breath. But there was no company, Anya. There was never any revolutionary tech. It was all smoke and mirrors. A shell game. Julian lunged for her again. You're lying, am I? Isabel sidestepped him, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. Tell her about Project Chimera, Julian. Tell her about the next-gen AI integration platform that was going to change the world. Show her the fancy prospectus, the one with the fabricated data and the photoshopped pictures of a non-existent office in Silicon Valley. She turned back to Anya, her voice dropping. The money from the investors. It wasn't used for acquisitions. It was funneled, laundered through a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations, one of which was my brother's unwitting firm. Julian would skim off hundreds of millions, paying off early investors with money from new ones to keep the illusion going. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, Anya just dressed up in a fancy Wall Street suit. And the whole thing is about to collapse. Anya stared at Julian, waiting for him to deny it, to rage, to offer some plausible explanation. But he said nothing. He simply stood there, breathing heavily, the cornered animal, the master of the universe, brought low by a single, unraveling thread. The entire foundation of her life, the penthouse, the clothes, the art, the security was not just built on lies, but on theft, on the stolen dreams and life savings of countless unknown people. She felt a dizzying vertigo, the floor seeming to drop away beneath her. Her hand flew to her stomach, to the one pure thing in this world of deceit. This child, her son or daughter, was heir to a fortune that didn't exist, a legacy of shame. So the divorce. Anya trailed off, the full, monstrous picture becoming clear. The settlement you offered me, that generous trust for our little child. Where was that money coming from, Julian? He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the dark, terrifying truth. It's the last of the clean money, isn't it? She whispered in horror. The money you had before all this started. You were trying to firewall it, to put it in my name and the baby's name so the SEC couldn't touch it when they came for the rest. You weren't giving me a gift. You were using your pregnant wife and your unborn child as a money mule. The silence that followed was a confession. It was the most damning sound Anya had ever heard. The man she had married was not just a cheat or a liar. He was a predator of the highest order, and he had just tried to make her his final accomplice. The doorbell chimed, not the private elevator this time, but the main service door to the apartment. A loud, insistent official buzzing. It was a sound none of them could ignore. Julian, Isabel, and Anya all froze, their 3-person drama instantly rendered insignificant. This was no longer a private implosion. The outside world was knocking. Julian's eyes, wide with terror, met Anya's. The last shred of his bravado was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man whose time had run out. The buzzing came again, longer this time, more demanding. "Don't answer it," Julian whispered a desperate, futile command. But Anya was already walking towards the door. The fog of her shock and betrayal was beginning to clear, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had been a pawn in his game for far too long. The game was over. Her hand closed around the cold steel handle of the door. Whatever was on the other side, it was the beginning of her new reality. She had to face it, for herself and for the child she carried. She pulled the door open. Standing in the hallway were two men in dark, conservative suits. They were nondescript, their faces impassive, but they carried an aura of unshakable authority that made the air in the multi-million-dollar penthouse feel cheap and thin. One of them held up a badge and an official-looking document. Julian Croft, the lead agent, asked, his voice calm and professional, but with an underlying steel that tolerated no argument. His eyes flicked past Anya to where Julian stood frozen in the middle of the living room. "I'm Agent Miller with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises." The FBI. The letters seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room. It was one thing to hear the acronym SEC from a panicked mistress. It was another to see the flesh and blood embodiment of a federal investigation standing on your doorstep. Julian looked as if he had been turned to stone. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy grey pallor. He stared at the agents, his mouth slightly agape. The master manipulator suddenly a speechless puppet. Isabel let out a small, choked sob and sank onto one of the ridiculously expensive minimalist sofas, her crimson dress pooling around her like a stain. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by the grim resignation of someone who had pulled the pin on a grenade and was now simply waiting for the blast. Agent Miller and his partner stepped into the apartment, their sensible shoes making solid, real-world sounds on the marble floor. Anya stepped back, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. She was watching a movie of her own life imploding. The agent's eyes swept the room, cataloguing the art, the furniture, the view, not with admiration, but with the cold appraisal of an asset seizure. "We also have a warrant for your arrest." "Mr. Croft." Agent Miller continued in the same dispassionate tone, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "For conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." The words were a death sentence, a formal indictment of everything Isabel had just revealed. The Ponzi scheme project, Chimera. The stolen money, it was all real. And now the consequences were real too. "This is a mistake," Julian finally stammered, his voice weak and unconvincing. "My lawyers." "Your lawyers have been notified," Agent Miller cut him off smoothly. "They can meet you downtown. Please place your hands behind your back." The sight of Julian Croft, the titan of Wall Street, the man whose confident smirk had sold billions in fraudulent dreams, being handcuffed in his own living room, was surreal. The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place was the final definitive sound of his world ending. He didn't resist. The fight was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed shock. As the second agent began to lead Julian towards the door, Isabel suddenly stood up, her face streaked with tears, but her voice filled with a new urgent terror. "Wait!" she cried out, her voice sharp. "That's not all. That's not the real reason." Agent Miller paused, turning to her with a look of mild professional interest. "The real reason for what, ma'am?" "For the divorce," she said. pointing a trembling finger at Julian. For why he had to get her out. It's not just about the money. There's something else. Something worse. Anya, who had been standing silently by the wall, felt a new wave of ice-cold dread. Worse. What could possibly be worse than a billion-dollar fraud that had ruined countless lives? What was the dark secret that even a massive financial crime was meant to cover up? Julian's head snapped up. He shot a look at Isabel, a look of pure murderous rage mixed with desperate pleading. Isabel, no. Don't. I have to, she sobbed. They need to know everything. They need to know why you were so desperate. She turned to the agents, her words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed rush. The SPACs. The fraud. That was the end game. But it started somewhere else. It started with his first company. Gen Tech Solutions. Anya vaguely remembered the name. It was the company Julian had founded before they met the one that had given him his initial millions and launched his reputation as a tech prodigy. He had sold it for a massive profit years ago. What about it? Agent Miller asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Gentech's flagship product was a proprietary data encryption software, Isabel explained, her voice gaining clarity as she forced the story out. It was sold to dozens of high-level corporate clients, banks, law firms, private equity funds. They promised impenetrable security. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Anya's. The pity was back in her gaze, but now it was deeper, darker, filled with a horror that Anya couldn't yet comprehend. But it wasn't an encryption software, Anya. It was a key. Julian built a back door into the system, a master key that gave him access to everything. For years, he had a live feed into the most sensitive corporate data in the country. Mergers and acquisitions plans, confidential legal strategies, insider trading information. The scale of it was dizzying. Julian hadn't just been a con artist. He had been a digital phantom, a ghost in the machine systematically stealing the lifeblood of the corporate world. That's how he made his first fortune. Isabel continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It wasn't genius. It was theft on an industrial scale. He knew which companies were going to be acquired before they did. He knew which stocks would soar and which would plummet. He wasn't predicting the market. He was reading the script. The agents exchanged a look. This was new information. This went beyond the SPACs. This was the origin story of his entire criminal enterprise. But that's still not the secret. Isabel choked out, tears streaming down her face again. That's just more fraud. Then what is it? Anya finally spoke, her voice a hollow echo in the room. She had to know. She had to know the final, terrible truth that was poisoning the very air she breathed. Isabel's gaze was fixed on Anya's pregnant belly. 2 years ago, one of the companies he was spying on, a pharmaceutical firm called Biovance. They were on the verge of a major breakthrough, a revolutionary new gene therapy treatment. But they had a problem. Their final human trials were showing some irregularities, dangerous side effects that they were trying to solve before announcing the drug. Julian was now shaking his head violently, his muffled pleas ignored by the agent holding him. Don't say it, Isabel. Please. Julian knew the drug was flawed. Isabel forged on her voice, cracking with the weight of her confession. He had access to the raw, hidden data. He knew it was dangerous. But he also knew that if another company acquired Biovance before the flaws were public, the stock would triple overnight. So he used his insider information. He leaked the news of the potential breakthrough without mentioning the dangerous side effects to a rival corporation. They initiated a hostile takeover, and Julian, having bought millions in Biovance stock beforehand, made a fortune. Over $200 million in a single week. That's insider trading. A huge case, but Agent Miller prompted. But it wasn't just insider trading. Isabel screamed the sound raw and agonizing. The new company, eager to recoup their investment, rushed the drug to market. They buried the flawed data. They pushed it through a compromised approval process. The drug was called Viridia. Anya's blood ran cold. Viridia. The name was a lightning bolt, a searing brand on her memory. It was prescribed as an advanced fertility treatment. Isabel whispered, her eyes locked on Anya's. For couples who had tried everything else, it was hailed as a miracle drug. Anya's hand, the one not pressed against her stomach, flew to her mouth. No, it couldn't be. The room began to spin. The minimalist grey walls seemed to close in on her. She and Julian had struggled to conceive. For 2 years they had been through a heart-breaking cycle of hope and disappointment. Doctors had found no specific issue, just unexplained infertility. Then a year ago, a new specialist, a top doctor recommended by Julian himself, had suggested a new cutting-edge treatment. A miracle drug from Europe, he had called it. Its name was Viridia. Anya stared at Julian, at the man she had married, the man whose child she was carrying. The man who had looked on with what she thought was shared joy when the pregnancy test finally came back positive. But it hadn't been joy. It had been the culmination of a monstrous plan. The side effects, Anya could barely form the words. Her throat was tight with terror. What were the side effects? Julian finally broke. A guttural, animalistic sob tore from his chest. Anya, I'm sorry. I can fix it. We have money. The best doctors. Isabel gave the final brutal answer, her voice devoid of all emotion, a flat line of horror. It worked. The drug allowed women to conceive. That part was true. But the hidden data from the original trials showed that in nearly 80% of cases, the fetus would develop a rare and fatal neurological disorder. Most didn't survive the 3rd trimester. Those who were born didn't live past their 1st year. The world went silent. The agents, the handcuffs, the penthouse, it all dissolved into an indistinct blur. The only thing that was real was the life kicking inside her. A life she had craved, a life she had celebrated, a life that had been conceived through a monstrous lie, a poison given to her by the man she loved. This was the dark secret. The divorce wasn't about protecting his money. It was about severing all ties before his child was born with the fatal condition he himself had knowingly unleashed upon the world. He wasn't trying to disown a wife. He was trying to outrun a death sentence. He was trying to erase the ultimate evidence of his crime, his own dying child. Anya looked at her husband, the father of her child, the architect of her destruction. He was no longer a man. He was a void. A black hole of greed and ambition that had consumed everything, including the life of his own unborn baby. The strength drained from her legs. The room tilted violently, the glittering view of Central Park spinning into a nauseating vortex. As her knees buckled and the world faded to black, the last thing she heard was the distant hollow sound of her own scream. Anya awoke to a world bleached of all color. The first sensation was not sight, but smell. A sharp, aggressive scent of antiseptic that scoured her nostrils and bore no resemblance to the curated peony and old money fragrance of her former life. The second was sound, the soft, insistent, and terrifyingly rhythmic beep of a machine somewhere to her left. For a fleeting, merciful moment, she was adrift in a sea of disorientation, the horrors of the previous evening feeling like the suffocating remnants of a fever dream. Had it been real? The cold words, the crimson dress, the click of handcuffs. Then with the force of a physical impact, the memories crashed back in. Viridia. The name detonated in her mind a single word that contained a universe of betrayal. It was the name of the drug. The poison, the monstrous lie she had welcomed into her body. A raw, guttural sob tore itself from her throat, and her hand, trembling uncontrollably, flew to her stomach. The gentle, reassuring swell was still there, a fragile vessel in a venomous sea. Was her baby the one pure thing she had left already a ghost? Easy now, Mrs. Croft. Take a deep breath. A calm, steady voice pierced through the fog of her panic. A woman in navy blue scrubs her face, a welcome portrait of professional kindness, was adjusting the IV drip in Anya's arm. You fainted. We brought you straight to Lenox Hill Hospital. We've been monitoring you and the baby. The baby, Anya's voice was a ragged whisper, a thread of sound in the cavernous silence of her fear. She couldn't bring herself to ask the real question, the one that clawed at the inside of her skull. Is it dying? The nurse's eyes softened with understanding. The baby is fine, she said, her words deliberate and clear. A little stressed when you were brought in, but the heartbeat is strong and steady now. Your own heart rate is elevated, which is understandable. You've had a severe shock. The baby is strong. 4 simple words. They were not a cure, not a promise, but they were a lifeline. In the raging flood of her shattered reality, Anya clung to them as if they were the last solid ground on earth. Her baby was a fighter. It was already more than its father had ever been. I need to see a doctor, Anya managed, pushing herself up slightly. The effort made the room spin. A specialist, not just an OB, a geneticist, someone who understands. I need to know everything. Her voice broke on the last word. She needed to know the shape of the monster she was facing. We've already paged the head of our maternal fetal medicine department, Dr. Elena Ramirez. The nurse reassured her, fluffing a thin pillow behind her head. She's the best. She'll be here to speak with you shortly. For now, just try to breathe. Rest was an impossible luxury. Her mind was a torture chamber, replaying Julian's face, twisting in panic, the cold finality of the FBI agent's voice, and Isabel's horrified confession over and over. The entire architecture of her life, a magnificent structure she had once admired, had been revealed as a criminal enterprise, a house of cards built on stolen dreams. And the final, most intimate, most unspeakable betrayal was swimming in her very womb, conceived from a miracle that was in truth a time bomb. As the nurse left to give her a moment, another figure appeared hesitantly in the doorway. It was Isabel. She had shed the blood-red dress, the armor of Julian's mistress, and now wore a simple, anonymous pair of jeans and a grey sweater. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the faint purple smudges of exhaustion beneath her eyes. The emerald fire in her irises had been banked, leaving a weary, sorrowful glow. Anya's body tensed. A primal part of her wanted to scream at this woman, the beautiful harbinger of her apocalypse. But the anger felt distant, a secondary emotion, muted by the all-consuming terror of Julian's ultimate sin. Isabel wasn't the enemy. She was just another piece of scorched debris in the blast radius of Julian Croft. "What do you want?" Anya asked, her voice raspy, devoid of accusation, but heavy with exhaustion. I came to see if you were all right," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. She hovered by the door, a respectful distance away, as if acknowledging she was trespassing on sacred ground of grief. "And to tell you, I told them everything." Anya remained silent, watching her. "The agents at the penthouse," Isabel clarified, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "After they took you, I stayed for hours. I told them about Viridia, about the Bio-Vance data, about Julian's back door into Gentech. I gave them the offshore account numbers he'd bragged about, the server locations he thought were hidden. Everything I knew. My brother is working with them too. He's turning over every record from his firm. He's terrified, but he wants to make it right." Why Anya's question was genuine, a flicker of curiosity in the darkness. Why not just disappear? He would have given you money to run. Isabel finally met her gaze, and Anya saw the profound depth of her self-loathing. Because he was going to let my brother, my family, take the fall for a crime he masterminded. That was the first crack in the fantasy. But the moment I found out about Viridia, the real truth of it, I looked at him, Julian, the man I thought I loved, and I saw a void. It wasn't just greed, Anya. What kind of person knowingly condemns unborn children for profit? It was a level of evil I couldn't comprehend. Her eyes flickered to Anya's stomach. When he told me he was divorcing you, I knew why. He was running from the evidence, from his own child. And I knew you were pregnant, but I didn't know about the drug. Not until my brother's lawyer uncovered the connection. The thought of you, going through the rest of your pregnancy celebrating only to face that. She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't let you be the last one to know the truth. It was the only thing I could do to claw back a single shred of my own soul. In that moment, Anya saw past the affair, past the label of mistress. She saw another woman who had been utterly conned, another life consumed by Julian's insatiable ego. They were bound by a strange, twisted sisterhood forged in the fires of his spectacular destruction. They've frozen everything. Isabel added her voice, flat and emotionless. Every asset. The penthouse is a federal crime scene. The accounts are locked. The cars, the art, the watches, it's all gone. Evidence in the largest fraud case in a decade. His lawyers are saying the evidence is insurmountable. He'll never see the outside of a prison cell again. Good, a cold, hard part of Anya thought. Let him rot. But the satisfaction was hollow, a fleeting warmth in an Arctic landscape of pain. Julian's imprisonment couldn't reverse time, couldn't purify the poison. The door opened again, and a woman with intelligent, compassionate eyes and an air of calm authority entered the room. "Mrs. Croft, I'm Dr. Ramirez." With a final lingering look of profound regret, Isabel quietly slipped out of the room, leaving Anya to face her new reality. The next hour was a clinical, terrifying blur of medical terminology, consent forms, and agonizing questions. Dr. Ramirez was a miracle of empathy and professionalism. She explained the process for an advanced diagnostic amniocentesis, carefully and patiently outlining the procedure, the risks, and the stark reality of the potential results. She didn't offer false hope, only facts. And for that, Anya was grateful. "I have to know," Dr. Anya pleaded, her composure finally crumbling under the clinical weight of it all. "Whatever it is, I have to know what I'm facing." "We will get you answers, Dr." Ramirez promised, her hand briefly resting on Anya's arm. The simple human touch was grounding. "As quickly and as safely as we possibly can." The days that followed were a unique form of purgatory. Anya remained in the hospital, a voluntary prisoner in a sterile white room, while the world outside feasted on the carcass of her old life. The news of Julian's arrest had gone supernova. "Wall Street Wunderkind or Ponzi King," screamed the cable news chyrons. His smug, handsome face was plastered everywhere, the poster boy for catastrophic hubris. The stories detailed the SPAC's fraud in lurid detail, but the darkest secret, the corporate evil of Viridia, remained a tightly sealed component of the federal case, a horror not yet fit for public consumption. Anya refused all visitors, save for her parents, who flew in immediately, their faces etched with a pain that mirrored her own. She hired a team of lawyers, not to fight for a share of Julian's blood money, but to meticulously expunge him from her life. To dissolve the marriage, to legally and financially firewall her child from the toxic Croft name and its indelible legacy of shame. She existed in a state of suspended animation, the week-long wait for the test results stretching into an eternity. She didn't sleep, she merely drifted in and out of consciousness. In her waking hours, she would stare out the window at the city, a city that now seemed alien to her. Every pregnant woman she saw, every baby in a stroller was a stab to the heart. She was suspended between a life that was over and a future that was too terrifying to contemplate. Finally, the day came. Dr. Ramirez entered her room alone, closing the door softly behind her. She held a file, and her expression was calm, professional, and utterly unreadable. Anya's heart began to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. This was it, the precipice. She gripped her own hands over her belly, a protective gesture that felt painfully inadequate. Dr. Ramirez sat in the chair beside the bed, opened the file but didn't look at it. She looked directly at Anya. "We have the results from the full genomic sequencing panel," she said, her voice even. Anya held her breath, bracing for the impact, for the words that would shatter the final fragments of her world. Dr. Ramirez took a slow, deliberate breath. "Anya, your baby is perfectly healthy." The words didn't register. They were a language she had forgotten how to speak. Anya just stared at her, her mind a blank slate of incomprehension. "What? No. That's not possible. Viridia, the neurological degradation." "I know," the doctor said gently, her professional calm finally breaking into a warm, reassuring smile. "We read the federal case files your lawyers managed to get unsealed for us. We knew the exact rare genetic markers we were looking for, and they are not there. We ran the test twice to be certain. He is completely, unequivocally unaffected. He." Her mind snagged on the word. "He. You're having a son." Anya Dr. Ramirez confirmed, her eyes shining. "A healthy baby boy." The dam broke. A sound, a wail that was equal parts grief and joy, tore from deep inside her. It was the sound of a week of terror, of months of unknowing, of a lifetime of betrayal, being washed away by a single miraculous wave of relief. The tears came, then hot and cleansing, pouring down her face as she finally truly let go. But how she sobbed, her body shaking. Isabel said, 80%. 80% is not 100%, the doctor said, softly, her voice thick with emotion. It means 20%, 1 in 5 were spared. It's a game of Russian roulette, played with the most precious stakes imaginable. It's a monstrous, unforgivable gamble. But Anya, you and your son, you won. She won. It wasn't a victory over Julian. It was a victory over fate, over poison, over the darkness that had tried to claim her future. Anya checked out of the hospital the next morning. The world looked different, the colors more vibrant, the air cleaner. The Julian Croft penthouse on Park Avenue was sealed a monument to a dead life. She walked away from it without a backward glance. With a small, life-saving loan from her parents, she found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn's Park Slope. It was a world away from the silent, sterile grandeur she had known. From her window, she saw not a curated park, but a living one. She could hear the joyful shrieks of children playing, the friendly bark of dogs, the distant, reassuring rumble of the F-train. It was the chaotic, beautiful symphony of real life. She spent the final peaceful months of her pregnancy rebuilding. She bought a second-hand crib and painted the nursery a cheerful, sunny yellow. She reconnected with her old circle of wonderfully messy, artistic friends who enveloped her in a cocoon of unconditional love and support, never once mentioning her notorious past. They brought her soup, helped her assemble furniture, and made her laugh, truly laugh for the first time in years. 3 months later, Leo Alexander was born, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. He was loud, demanding, and utterly perfect. He had her eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair. Holding him for the first time, skin to skin, feeling his tiny, fragile fingers instinctively curl around hers, Anya felt a love so vast and powerful it rearranged her entire universe. This was real wealth. This was a legacy. One rainy afternoon as a 2-week-old, Leo slept soundly on her chest. A news alert popped up on her phone. Julian Croft sentenced. She read that faced with an avalanche of evidence, and Isabel's unshakable testimony, he had accepted a plea bargain to avoid having the full horrific details of the Viridia scandal made public in a trial. He was sentenced to 150 years in a federal supermax facility with no possibility of parole. Anya looked down at her sleeping son, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. She felt no hatred for Julian, no desire for revenge. She felt nothing at all. He was a ghost, the antagonist of a story that was already over. Her story and Leo's was just beginning. Her life was no longer defined by the man she had lost, but by the son she had almost lost and had miraculously gained. She was not the millionaire's disgraced wife. She was Leo's mother, and in the quiet, sun-drenched world of her small Brooklyn apartment, she was the richest woman in the world. Anya's story is a harrowing journey from a gilded cage to true freedom. It's a reminder that wealth can be a mask for unimaginable darkness, and that true strength isn't found in penthouses or designer clothes, but in the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. She lost a life of luxury, but gained a life of purpose, proving that even after the most devastating betrayals, we have the power to rise from the ashes and build a new world for ourselves and for our children. Her story isn't just about the downfall of a wicked man, but the rise of an unbreakable woman.